Her voice was bright and clear across the dining table we had chosen together 40 years ago, the one with the slight scar on the leg where a young Robert had crashed his toy truck. Is everyone served? Tiffany asked. Her eyes, the color of cool jade, glided over cousins and nephews, over the steaming platters of turkey and sweet potato casserole, and then right past me, as if I were a ghost in my own chair. The space before me on the polished mahogany was bare. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold stone settling low in my stomach. My son, Robert, stared down at his mashed potatoes, his fork pushing them into a little mound, as if they held the secrets to the universe. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He couldn't. This was not an oversight. This was a statement, delivered in my home, using my family as the audience. It was a calculated, public act of making me invisible, the final flourish on a masterpiece of erasure. I kept my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. I had learned long ago that the world grants you the dignity you demand for yourself. I would not give her the satisfaction of a scene. I would not cry or raise my voice. I would simply sit here, in this empty space she had carved out for me, and I would remember. Later that night, the house was finally quiet. The lingering smells of roasted poultry and cinnamon fought with the deep, abiding scent of lemon oil and old wood that was the house's true perfume. I wrapped myself in David's old navy blue cardigan, the wool worn soft and still holding the faintest trace of his aftershave. I was looking for him, for a comfort that felt a million miles away. His office was just as he duffed it, a sanctuary of paper and memory. I ran my hand along the smooth, cool surface of his old oak desk, my fingers tracing the familiar grain. They caught on a slight imperfection near the back of the bottom drawer. It wasn't a scratch, it was a seam, fine as a hair. My heart gave a little thump. With a bit of pressure from my thumbnail, a small section of the drawer's floor popped up. It wasn't letters or old photographs inside. It was something small and cold and modern, an encrypted flash drive. The tea went cold in its china cup before I remembered to drink it. On the kitchen table, beside the untouched cup, lay the envelope from the company. My monthly partner dividend, something I'd received like clockwork for over 40 years, had been relabeled. The amount printed on the check was the same, but the word in the memo line was a judgment, pension. It felt like being demoted in my own life, a retiree, a relic. Fueled by a new kind of chill, I went back to the office and turned on the desktop computer. I tried to log in to the Thomson Home server, a routine I'd performed thousands of times to check on project timelines or approve design schematics. Access denied. The red letters blinked on the screen, impersonal and final. A moment later, my email pinged. It was an automated message from HR, a department Tiffany had created. It informed me that my credentials had been updated for security protocols as part of my retirement transition. They were locking me out of the house David and I had built, board by digital board. My gaze fell back to the hidden compartment in the desk drawer. Tucked beside the flash drive, almost hidden in the shadows, was a worn leather journal, the kind David used for jotting down notes on job sites. His handwriting on the last page was shaky, a testament to the disease that had stolen his physical strength, but not his clarity of mind. "My memory is fading," he had written, "but my love is not. The drive is the lock. This journal is the key. Your name was the first word on the contract, Martha. Make sure it's the last." A single tear, hot and heavy, finally fell, splashing onto the page. It wasn't a tear of grief, not entirely. It was a tear of recognition. David had seen something, and he had left me a map. I didn't call Robert. There was no point. He had made his choice at that silent dinner table. I called Kayla, my sister's granddaughter. She's a fiercely intelligent young woman studying cybersecurity up at Howard. When I told her what I'd found, her voice was calm and serious. "Aunt Martha, don't you connect that drive to anything. Don't even plug it into a wall charger. I'm on my way." She drove through the night from DC and arrived just after dawn, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder like a doctor's kit. She didn't treat me like a fragile old woman. She treated me like a client. She set up her computer on the dining room table, creating what she called a secure virtual environment, a digital clean room to prevent anything on the drive from being tracked or altered. The journal was the key, just as David had said. It wasn't filled with passwords, but with prompts. The date we broke ground on the Peachtree Project, your mother's middle name, the street where we signed the first papers. Each answer, a piece of our shared history, unlocked another layer of encryption. With a final click, the drive opened. It wasn't just a few folders. It was a perfect, mirrored replica of the entire Thomson Homes server, an untouchable archive with time-stamped backups going back years. It was David's digital fortress. Kayla navigated the files with a quiet intensity. He must have started this right after his diagnosis, she murmured, her respect for her late great-uncle evident. He created a ghost copy of everything. She pointed to a folder labeled T Financials. Inside were dozens of documents, but two files stood out: partnership_agreement_original.pdf and partnership_agreement_filed.pdf. She opened them side by side. They looked identical, but Kayla zoomed in on a single clause in the second document, a clause that redefined my partnership stake as a convertible retirement fund. Then she brought up the file's history. The metadata glowed on her screen, a story all its own. Last modified, Tiffany Thompson, she read softly. Date, November 14th, 2022. I didn't need to check a calendar. I knew that date. It was the day I sat by David's hospice bed, holding his hand, telling him it was okay to rest. Arthur Bates, our first lawyer and David's oldest friend, looked at the two documents displayed on Kayla's laptop in his quiet, wood-paneled office. The air smelled of old books and integrity. He didn't say a word for a long time, just stared at the screen. He didn't move a muscle until Kayla highlighted the metadata, the digital trail of Tiffany's deceit. Then he slowly took off his thick-rimmed glasses, polished them with a handkerchief, and set them down on his cluttered desk. He looked at me, his eyes full of a cold, precise anger. "She didn't just change the locks, Martha," he said, his voice low but firm. "She tried to burn down the house with you still in it." He wasn't like the slick corporate lawyers Tiffany favored. Arthur was from the old school, where a man's word and a handshake still meant something. He saw this not just as a legal breach, but as a moral violation. He validated every suspicion I'd held, every hurt I'd swallowed. "We won't file a noisy lawsuit," he said, already sketching out a plan on a yellow legal pad. That's what she'd expect. "We'll file a silent, emergency motion with the court, citing a shareholder dispute based on fraudulent filings. We'll ask for an immediate, temporary freeze on all company assets." He leaned forward, tapping the screen with his pen. To make this forgery look legitimate, she'd have needed 2 witness signatures. Let's see who she invented. He zoomed in on the bottom of the page, on 2 looping, unfamiliar signatures. "The names aren't invented," he said, a strange look crossing his face. "I know these people." The first name belonged to David's neurologist, Dr. Evans. I steeled myself and called his office. He remembered Tiffany's visit vividly, his voice tinged with a professional concern that now made perfect sense. She was very inquisitive, he recalled. She kept asking about David's cognitive state, if he was still lucid for decision-making. It felt less like she was concerned for her father-in-law and more like she was doing an assessment. He told me how she had pressed him for a definitive statement on David's capacity, something he was ethically unable to provide. Then she canceled David's next appointment, saying the family would be handling his care privately from then on. "I never heard from them again," he said, a note of regret in his voice. "I was worried. David was often exhausted and disoriented during her visits. She seemed to take advantage of his moments of confusion rather than trying to soothe him. There was a pause on the line, the sound of papers shuffling. I held my breath. "You know, Martha," he said, his tone shifting, "her questions were so unusual that, for my own records, I made a note of my concerns and dated it. It's right here in his file. Would a copy of that be helpful to you?" The question was a lifeline. It was outside corroboration. It was the first echo of the truth, coming back to me from a place I never expected. "This isn't sloppy forgery," Kayla said later that evening, her eyes fixed on the screen in her temporary command center at my dining table. "This is meticulous, layered digital construction. She's smart, I'll give her that." She walked me through it, peeling back the layers of the documents like an onion. She showed me how Tiffany had used cloning software to lift my authentic digital signature from a supply invoice I had approved back in 2018. Then, she'd carefully applied that signature to the fraudulent retirement letter she'd created in 2022. "See this?" Kayla pointed. "The font in the signature block is Arial 10. The rest of the document is Times New Roman 11. A tiny detail, but it's a fingerprint." She showed me more. The timestamp on the document's creation was a Sunday at 2 a.m., a time when the company servers were always offline for maintenance. The metadata showed the file originated on Tiffany's personal laptop, not a company machine. Each piece of evidence was a small, precise nail in the coffin of her lie. My phone rang, startling me. It was Arthur. His voice was quiet, devoid of emotion. "The motion is filed," he said. "The judge will review it in chambers tomorrow morning. No one on the other side knows a thing. The order, if it's granted, will freeze every asset and every account, silently." A fragile hope, the first I'd felt in years, began to bloom in my chest. We had the truth. Now we had to see if the system would listen. That night, unable to sleep, I sat in David's office again, navigating the digital archive he had left me. I clicked through folders of blueprints, contracts, and financial statements, but I found myself drawn to a folder simply labeled Personal. Inside, nestled between old tax receipts and warranty documents, was a file I hadn't seen in years. It was a scanned copy of a document we had written together on a yellow legal pad one rainy Saturday afternoon, titled Our Promise. It wasn't a legal document, but a mission statement, a partnership charter outlining our values. It spoke of building communities, not just houses, and it explicitly laid out our intention for the full control and ownership of Thompson Homes to pass to the surviving partner, to protect our legacy from outside interests. It was our heart put to paper. In the margin of the scanned page, a handwritten note had been added. It was David's script, from about 5 years ago, still strong. "Tiffany wants to formalize this into a new trust," he'd written. "Says it's more efficient. I told her you and I would handle it together." My breath caught in my throat. I checked the date on the note. It was from the week before his diagnosis took a sharp turn, the week before his memory and clarity began to fade in and out like a faulty radio signal. She had been planning this for years, waiting for him to become too weak to fight back, and for me to become too consumed by grief to notice. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, when an email arrived. It was from Arthur. The subject line was blank. The body of the message contained a single word: "Granted." I didn't cheer, I didn't cry. I finally exhaled, a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 long years, ever since David had taken his last. The silent, temporary freeze on all of Thompson Homes' assets was in effect. Tiffany could no longer sell, rebrand, or transfer a single dollar. She was in charge of a kingdom whose gates had been quietly locked, and she didn't even have the key. At that exact moment, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A courier in a crisp uniform walked up to my door and handed me a thick, glossy envelope. My name was printed on the front in an elegant, flowing script: I slid it open with my thumb. It was an invitation, embossed in gold foil on heavy cardstock. Tiffany was hosting a press conference and cocktail reception at a downtown Atlanta hotel. The purpose was to announce the bold new future of the company, a complete rebranding that would erase the Thompson Homes name forever. I decided to go. Kayla worried it was a bad idea, but Arthur agreed it was wise to gather information. I chose a simple gray dress and sat quietly in a chair at the very back of the hotel ballroom. They had a large, beautiful photo of David and me at the entrance, taken at an awards ceremony 20 years ago. We were smiling, his arm wrapped securely around my waist. It was positioned under a sleek new logo I didn't recognize. The caption below the photo read, "Honoring a cherished legacy." My name was not mentioned. Tiffany took the stage, poised and eloquent in a sharp crimson suit. She spoke of continuing David's vision, of innovation and growth. It was a masterful performance. During a short break, an old business associate, a developer named Frank, came over to me. "Martha, it's good to see you," he said warmly. "Congratulations on the smooth transition. Tiffany told me months ago about the retirement you'd been planning for years. Good for you." I just smiled and nodded, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. Frank kept talking, oblivious. I remember her telling me all about it. She said, "Martha signed off on everything right before her big trip to Italy. She's so excited to finally relax." He mentioned a date in late spring. He didn't know, couldn't know, that my big trip to Italy had been a week spent sleeping on a cot in a hospice room, holding my husband's hand as he slipped away from me. The lie was so blatant, so cruel, that it solidified my resolve. The second witness on the forged document was a junior paralegal from Tiffany's old law firm. Arthur's investigator found him easily. He was young, barely out of law school, and terrified. He agreed to speak with Arthur over the phone on the condition of anonymity. I listened on speakerphone from Arthur's office. "I witnessed that signature," the young man whispered, his voice trembling. "But Mrs. Thompson wasn't present. It was a Sunday afternoon. Tiffany came into the office with a stack of documents. She said you were out of the country on a pre-planned vacation, and she needed to get these filed urgently to meet a deadline." He explained how she had been his direct superior, how he felt pressured to just sign where she pointed. He admitted that the date was falsified in the firm's official logbook at her direction. He was ashamed, and he was scared of losing his license. He wanted to make it right. After a long pause, he added one more thing, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "I have the original email she sent me asking me to do it," he said, his voice barely audible. "She asked me to come in that Sunday. The subject line was urgent admin. I never deleted it." The first letter from Tiffany's newly hired, very expensive lawyer was polished and cold. It arrived the day after the court notified them of the asset freeze. It accused me of being a grieving, confused old woman, of tortious interference and slander. It threatened a countersuit that would bankrupt me. It was designed to intimidate, to scare me into backing down. I read it, folded it neatly, and handed it to Arthur. His rebuttal was sharper, shorter, and contained no threats at all. It was a single, calm email sent directly to the senior partner at Tiffany's law firm. Arthur's email had 5 attachments. The first was Kayla's complete metadata analysis of the forged documents. The second was the sworn, notarized affidavit from Dr. Evans, including his dated notes about Tiffany's manipulative questions. The third was the sworn, notarized affidavit from the young paralegal, detailing the fraudulent signing. The fourth was a copy of the email with the subject line, "Urgent Admin." And the fifth, the final blow, was the original, untampered partnership agreement from David's encrypted drive. The subject line of Arthur's email was simple, elegant, and devastating. It read, "Suggestion, a forensic comparison." Tiffany's lawyers replied in under 5 minutes. Their message was 2 sentences.
We have received your correspondence. We will be in touch. Then, for the next 48 hours, there was complete silence.
She stood at the podium in the hotel ballroom, her voice resonating with confidence. The press conference for the grand rebranding went ahead as planned. Tiffany was trying to project strength, to pretend that nothing was wrong. She smiled for the cameras, speaking of a new era for the company, an era she was leading. She didn't see Kayla, dressed like any other college student in jeans and a Howard sweatshirt, sitting in the back row with her laptop open. As Tiffany began to talk about her vision for the future, Kayla uploaded a single, simple file to the shared network used by the press corps covering the event. It wasn't an attack, it was an exhibit. A two-column web page appeared on their phones and laptops. The left column was headed Original Documents, Source, David Thompson Archive. It showed our founding papers, our mission statement, our partnership agreement. The right column was headed Filed Documents, Source, Tiffany Thompson. It showed her forgeries, with every altered clause, every faked signature, and all the damning metadata glowing in a calm, accusatory red. No announcement was made. No one shouted, but one by one, reporters looked down at their screens. A low whisper started at the back of the room and spread like fire through dry grass, a wave of murmurs and sideways glances that washed over the entire ballroom. Tiffany faltered mid-sentence, seeing the faces in the crowd turn from rapt attention to confusion, then to accusation. Her PR manager, a young woman with a panicked look in her eyes, discreetly stepped onto the stage and whispered in her ear. Tiffany's face went white as a sheet. She gripped the podium, stammered a few words, and then abruptly ended the press conference, citing a sudden family emergency. There was no dramatic confession, no tearful apology. Justice, when it came, was as quiet and methodical as the crime had been. A few days later, a public statement was released by the company's board of directors. It was a masterpiece of corporate speak about protecting the institution and thanking Tiffany for her service as she stepped aside for personal reasons. Her erasure was as swift and silent as the one she had planned for me. That afternoon, I received a single, stilted voicemail from Robert. He didn't apologize. He just said he was heading back to North Carolina for a while. He was a historian who had failed to learn from his own. Tiffany was gone. An interim board, led by Arthur Bates, was named to stabilize the company. A week later, a small, square package arrived by courier. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation. There was only a small, leather-bound copy of Our Promise, the value statement David and I had written together all those years ago. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten note on plain, unadorned paper. It said, "You were right to protect what mattered." It was not signed. The new plaque on the side of the first home we ever built had weathered over the years, but the promise behind it hadn't. I stood on the sidewalk of that quiet suburban street, looking at the small brick house that had started it all. The early spring bulbs were pushing up through the last of the frost, a sign of stubborn life. I had decided not to pursue legal damages against Tiffany or Robert. Vengeance felt like a hollow prize. Instead, I worked with Arthur and the new board to create the Thompson Homes Archive. We legally preserved David's digital drive and the original founding documents as the permanent, unalterable record of the company's charter. It was a foundation that could never again be threatened by lies. It was about honoring the past to protect the future. Back in my office, while organizing David's old physical files for the new archive, my fingers brushed against a thick envelope tucked behind a heavy ledger book from 1998. It was addressed to me, in his strong, early handwriting. The postmark was from over 20 years ago. I had never seen it before. He must have put it there for me to find one day, a message in a bottle sent across time. When I walked into the first official board meeting a week later, they didn't applaud. They stood up, a quiet, uniform motion around the long mahogany table. They nodded at me, a gesture of profound respect from people who were finally ready to listen. I took my seat at the head of the table, not as a new CEO, but as what I had always been, the founding partner. On the lapel of my jacket, I wore a small pin David had given me decades ago, a tiny silver architect's compass. I opened the meeting, my voice steady and clear, laying out a future for Thompson Homes that was rooted in the values David and I had established from the very beginning. Afterward, I stepped out of the tall glass building into the cool, clean Atlanta air. The future of our company was secure, its past honored. I sat on a bench in the small park across the street and finally opened the old letter from David. It wasn't about business plans or stock options. It was a love letter. It was page after page of him thanking me, not for my design sense or my business acumen, but for being the soul of our shared life. He wrote that while he might be the spine, I was the heartbeat. I folded the letter and put it back in my purse, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. It was an open sky, cool air, the story finally written in a hand that could never be erased, my own.